Batman and Robin. Novelization by Michael Jan Friedman.
Prologue. A storm was coming. 8-year-old Bruce Wayne could feel it in the biting coldness of the air as he and his parents emerged from the movie theater. He could feel it in the way the hair prickled on the back of his neck. And in case he still harbored some doubt, it was there in the pinkish-gray cast of the sky and the way the wind swirled in front of the theater, driving orphaned newspaper pages and brightly colored candy bar wrappers in the ghostly blue light of the street lamps. The boy felt himself shiver and pulled up the collar of his coat. He wasn't the only one doing that either. Everyone coming out of the theater was bundling up. Even the pigeons seemed agitated, eager to get to whatever shelter they could find. A storm was coming, and everything in the world seemed to know it. "Did you like the movie?" his mother asked. Bruce turned to her, forgetting the chill for a moment as he basked in the glow of her smile, in the gray of her eyes. His mother was beautiful. He was proud of her for that. "Yes," he said. "I liked it a lot." Bruce felt a hand on his shoulder, strong but gentle, his father's hand. The boy smiled at the sense of assurance it gave him. With a hand like that on his shoulder, he could do anything, take any risk, no matter how great. "Of course he liked it," Bruce's father observed. "How could a youngster his age not have liked it?" He winked at the boy above his dark mustache. "What could be more thrilling than the snap of a cape and the flash of a blade and wide-eyed terror on the face of some villain?" Bruce nodded, warming to the subject. "Uh-huh. And the way he marked him with a Z, that was cool too." He would never forget that lightning slash of Zorro's sword point, or the sense that the bad guys had been shamed for what they'd done. "Of course," Bruce's father added, "it wasn't just his flashing blade that carried the day." He tapped his temple with his forefinger. "It was what Zorro had up here." He pointed to his chest beneath his woolen coat. "And in here, that's what made him a hero." "Such wisdom," his wife jibed good-naturedly. Bruce's father grunted. "I married you, my dear. If that's not a sign of wisdom, I'd like to know what is." "Flatterer," his mother chuckled. "Just calling them the way I see them." Bruce liked it when his parents talked that way in front of him. It made him feel grown up. He wanted to say something clever too, but couldn't think of anything. Suddenly he felt a drop on his face. It was colder than it should have been, colder than rain had a right to be. Sleet, he thought. "Great," said his father, wincing as he came to the same conclusion. "Who expected this so early in the year, and leave it to me to park so far from the theater?" "It's all right," said Bruce's mother, though she frowned a little as she watched sleet catch the light from the street lamps. "Honestly, Thomas, a little weather never hurt anyone." They walked down the block, away from the theater and the emerging crowd, past a dirty stone building with wrought iron bars over its first-floor windows. Looking up, Bruce saw a stone figure with the face and wings of an eagle sticking out from a third-floor cornice. The figure seemed to leer at him, to grin like the devil as the sleet grew heavier. Looking away, he let his parents bustle him along the sidewalk. The boy had no idea how to get back to their car. He didn't know the city because he had very seldom got a chance to visit. Mostly he played on the sprawling grounds of his family's estate. That's what made this trip to a downtown theater so special. That and the fact that his dad came along. After all, Thomas Wayne was the best surgeon in town. He took on only the toughest cases, the kind no one else would touch, but his responsibility to his patients didn't end in the operating room. He had to make sure someone was around if they needed help afterward, if there was an emergency. And there weren't many other doctors skilled enough to cover for him. Bruce and his parents reached the corner, turned, and went up the avenue. They saw dark, sky-spanning bridges and mighty office spires, the tops of which were swallowed by the storm. Then they turned again. They passed a tall, gray church, a tiny food store with a Spanish sign, and a freight entrance to a dress factory, and hurried on, the wind stinging Bruce's cheeks. Past more buildings, more shops, some of them shuttered. At some point, the boy realized he and his parents were the only people he could see in any direction. But it was okay, he told himself. As long as he had his parents on either side of him, he had nothing to worry about. It was an adventure, that's all. An adventure he could tell the kids about in school the next day. At one point, Bruce thought he heard the scrape of footsteps on the sidewalk behind them. But when he glanced over his shoulder, he didn't see anything. He chalked it up to his imagination. By the time they reached the next corner, it was really coming down, a hissing, whispering barrage that slid past his collar and sent ice water down his neck. His parents tugged him along, no doubt as blinded as the boy was by the sheeting deluge and just as eager to get out of it. They rushed down the avenue and then up another street, and then stopped. Bruce's father looked around, his breath making a vapor trail. "Where's the car?" he asked. The boy looked around, too, as if he could shed some light on the problem, but of course, he couldn't. His mother shook her head. "I don't know, but if we don't find it soon, Bruce is going to catch a cold." "Nonsense, Martha," said his father. "You don't catch a cold from the weather." But the lines in his face showed that he was concerned. "Not to worry," he said in a softer voice, hugging the boy to him with one arm and his wife with the other. "It must be on the next street." But halfway up the next street, Bruce's father began muttering under his breath. "It's not here either. It's gotta be the next one." "Thomas," said his mother. Then his father pointed. Following the gesture, Bruce saw the alley mouth that opened across the street from them. It was shadowy, full of garbage cans and windswept debris. "I remember now," said his father. "There was an alley right nearby. The car is just on the other side." "Are you sure?" asked the boy's mother. His father nodded, his hair and mustache crusted with sleet. "I'm sure. Come on." He led them across the street and into the alley. The place was dark and foreboding and full of puddles, but Bruce could see a street light at the other end. With his mother on one side of him and his father on the other, he put his head down and made his way against the wind. "It's okay," the boy assured himself. "It's almost over. We'll be home before we know it, and there will be a fire in the—" Suddenly he heard a voice ring out. As it echoed in the narrow confines of the alley, Bruce turned and saw a man standing behind them. A man in a cap and a leather jacket. He had something in his hand. "What?" asked the boy's father. Apparently he hadn't heard what the man said either. The man came closer, and Bruce realized what he'd seen in the man's hand. It was a gun. Bruce felt a terrible chill, an arctic cold that seemed to reach into his bowels and freeze them solid. His heart beat heavily in his chest, a trapped animal desperately trying to get out. "What do you want?" Thomas Wayne demanded. There was a moment of silence. The boy listened closely, expecting the man to answer, but the man didn't open his mouth. Instead, a flare of blue-white fire came out of his gun, and there was a crack, like the sound of Zorro's whip, but louder, as loud as thunder splitting the heavens. Bruce's father grunted, as if mired in slow motion. The boy looked at him, saw his father double over in pain. Then he fell to the ground, still clutching at himself. No, thought Bruce, his mind refusing to accept the evidence of his eyes. No, not my father. Then there was another peal of thunder, and as he watched, his mother went spinning away from him, the string of pearls around her neck breaking free and scattering over the pavement. "Mother?" he screamed inwardly, and then, even more frantically, more disbelievingly, he screamed it aloud. "Mother?" But she couldn't answer. Martha Wayne just lay there, her blood pooling on the darkly glistening ground around her, her arms stretched toward the equally motionless body of her husband. Bruce's hands climbed to his mouth, became fists as the man with the gun reached inside his father's coat and took something off his mother's wrist. The boy yelled something at him, he didn't know what, caught in a tide of horror and anger and despair. Then the gunman was gone. Bruce approached his parents' bodies, touched them, felt the absence of life and hope, and sank down between them on the hard, wet ground. In the distance he heard footsteps, clear and sharp but retreating, fading into nothingness. Then, after a time, there was another sound, the strident skirl of a siren, growing louder and louder until it filled the whole world with its complaint. He looked up at the whirling lights of a police car, saw the policemen get out, guns drawn, heard one of them call for an ambulance. But it was too late. Bruce knew that. It was cold, he thought. It was so cold. And now he was all alone in the storm. Alfred stood by one of the immensely tall windows in the living room of Wayne Manor. He watched a forlorn flock of geese navigate an iron-gray sky. Like so much of nature, the geese were retreating before the inevitable onset of winter. A tiny figure was standing in the snow-dusted field outside the mansion, looking up at the geese as Alfred was. But despite the chill, he wasn't retreating, not from winter or anything else. "Mr. Pennyworth?" The butler turned and regarded the stout, balding gentleman sitting in the master's easy-chair, or at least what had been the master's easy-chair until a couple of miserable weeks ago. The man's cup sat on a coaster, which in turn sat on an 18th-century end table. "More tea, sir?" Alfred asked. "No," said the stout man. "Thank you, but you see what I'm saying, don't you? About the danger?" "To Master Bruce," the butler replied. "Precisely," said the stout man. "As you're aware, Mr. Pennyworth, I've treated a great many victims of severe psychological trauma, and in every case, the reaction to that trauma has been rather obvious. Sometimes it takes the form of aggression, a desire to strike back at one's fate, if you will, often wildly and indiscriminately. In other instances, we see a withdrawal from life, a shoring up of the mind's defenses that in the extreme approaches catatonia. The patient sinks into a deep morass of despair, afraid to ever again invest his love and trust in another human being." "And yet," Alfred responded, for an "and yet" seemed rather implicit in the psychiatrist's tone. "And yet," the stout man went on, "none of these behaviors is observable in Master Bruce. To all outward appearances, he is a normal boy, or at least as normal as he was before the incident." He blushed. It was an awkward moment, to be sure. After all, Alfred had been affected by the incident as well. True, he had served as the Waynes' butler only for a brief period of time, and had never expected to remain here for long. But by the time of their deaths he had grown exceedingly fond of his employers, and he gathered that was evident in his behavior. "Yes," Alfred said, doing his best to affect the psychiatrist's clinical tone. "The incident. Please continue." The stout man folded his hands across his ample belly. "As I understand it, the boy has always been something of a loner. No steady playmates, no other child to whom he's been particularly close." "True," the butler confirmed. "However, that was hardly anyone's choice. The vast majority of Master Bruce's schoolmates live on the other side of town, and it simply was not practical for him to engage in regular visits." The psychiatrist smiled sympathetically. "I didn't mean to imply otherwise, Mr. Pennyworth. I'm only pointing out that the boy wasn't particularly gregarious to begin with, so one wouldn't look for him to be gregarious now." He paused. "As I say, normal, at least on the outside." "But not on the inside," Alfred sighed. The stout man's expression waxed more serious. "No, and therein lies his peril. You see, young Bruce may seem quite the stalwart, but there's still a child beneath that veneer of calm acceptance. A child who's experienced a greater trauma than you or I can ever comprehend." Alfred glanced at the strangely resolute figure in the wintry field. The geese were gone now, but the boy was still staring at something. "Don't be fooled, Mr. Pennyworth. The day will come when that veneer crumbles and the boy reacts to the memory of his ordeal. Such matters may be postponed, but not indefinitely. And the longer this one is delayed, the greater the damage will be to his psyche." Alfred nodded, his eyes still on the figure. "I see." which makes it all the more important to encourage young Bruce to come to grips with his fate, to open himself up to it and embrace it sooner rather than later, no matter how painful it may be for him. The butler nodded again. This, then, will be the course of your treatment? To bring his feelings about his parents' murder out into the open? Yes, otherwise he may simply explode one day, and he may not be the only one hurt in that explosion. Alfred swallowed at the prospect. You've spoken of this with Master Bruce's Uncle Philip? I have, the stout man confirmed. He says he values your opinion more than his own. You've lived with the boy day in and day out, he tells me, and he has not. The butler considered his young charge. He knew the stout man was right. There was a great deal of pain contained in that tiny vessel. Somehow it had to be let out. Tell me, he said, what is your prognosis? The psychiatrist paused. Even in the simplest cases, it's difficult to say. We're not talking about a broken leg or a torn muscle here. We're talking about a wound to the soul. Still, Alfred pressed, how do you think this will all come out? Off the record, if you prefer. Another pause. I am not terribly optimistic, the stout man admitted, but I assure you I will do my best. The butler frowned. It didn't seem he had much choice in the matter. Before his death, Thomas Wayne had spoken highly of the stout man. If Master Bruce was going to receive treatment, it might as well come from someone his father had known and respected. Very well, Alfred said at last. Please let me know when you would like to see Master Bruce. I will make certain he is present. Excellent, the psychiatrist remarked. With a bit of an effort, he got to his feet. Just one more thing, Mr. Pennyworth. Alfred looked at him. Yes? Forgive me, but Mr. Wayne once described your employment here as temporary. He mentioned that your first love is the theater, and that you hope to return to it one day. It had occurred to me, Alfred conceded. The stout man's brow furrowed. Normally it would be none of my business, but I ask you out of concern for young Bruce. He's already lost the two most important people in the world to him. I don't know how close you and he have become, but right now you're the only real constant in his life. And if I have any intentions of leaving, it would be a good idea to speak of them now, Alfred said, picking up on the thought. So I can be eased out of the boy's life. The psychiatrist eyed him. That's the gist of it, yes. The butler glanced again at the boy. He was still standing there in the field, his eyes fixed on only God knew what, the weight of the world on his narrow little shoulders. No, said Alfred. It may once have been true that I considered myself a transient in this house, but it is true no longer. I intend to remain here for the duration. However long that may be, he added inwardly, matching his resolve to that of the lonely child outside. A teenage Bruce Wayne stood in the shadows of a gnarled and ancient oak, out of sight of the full moon, and surveyed the athletic field that sprawled before him in the frosty blue light. The university's academic buildings loomed behind it like dark, hoary gods brooding over an ancient battleground. But it was only a battleground in the most figurative sense, in the sense of clashing athletes. From a literal perspective, it was just a meadow with an oval track in the center of it. The track was deserted this night except for a solitary figure in a navy blue sweatsuit, loping easily over the clay-red composite surface. Large but agile-looking, just shy of his 24th birthday, he kept up a ground-eating pace without much effort, stride after stride, minute after minute, lap after lap. And he wasn't even pushing himself. He was just warming up. A casual observer might not have known that, but Bruce Wayne knew it. He knew all the man's best foot race times by heart. Of course, running wasn't the man's only forte. He was also a world-class competitor in the javelin toss, the hurdles, the pole vault, and several other events. That was what it took to become the premier decathlete on the planet. One had to be among the elite in a great many areas of endeavor. Bruce knew a lot more about the man in the sweatsuit. How he had been born in a small picturesque town in Europe, which accounted for his slight accent. How his mother had been an Olympic-caliber speed skater and his father a prominent biologist. How they had moved to the United States shortly after their son turned 2, and a good deal more, some of which the man himself might have even forgotten. But none of it was particularly important right now. Only the ease with which the man flowed around the oval. Only the speed he mustered without breaking a sweat. Bruce watched, eager to learn, eager to add the man's posture and rhythms and expertise to his collection. That was the way he had come to think of himself, as a collector, as someone who took a little from here and a little from there, acquiring and assembling and stockpiling. He'd been at it since he was 14. And though he was nearly 20 now, his collection was still woefully incomplete. He was like a squirrel, he thought, hoarding nuts for a long, cold winter. But the squirrel in his analogy had an advantage. It knew what to expect. It knew what it would need to survive. Bruce did not. So he collected everything he thought he might need, no matter how offbeat or esoteric. He learned martial arts and patience from a wizened old man in Korea, street smarts from the legendary manhunter Ducard in France, fencing in the Soviet Union, and auto racing in the streets of Rome. He became fluent in several different languages and obtained a working knowledge of several more. He studied chemistry and biology, criminology and computer design with a dozen teachers in a dozen different places. All in the hope that when the time came, he'd be ready. He'd be equipped for the kind of mission no one had undertaken in the history of humankind. After a while, the man on the track slowed down, to a jog, to a walk. Then he crossed the short-cropped field described by the track and approached a narrow runway made of the same composite material. There was an elongated sandpit at the end of the runway. Someone had raked into it recently, taking out the footprints that had dug into it and bulldozed the sand around. But it wouldn't stay like that for long, Bruce mused. As he looked on, the man in the sweatsuit took up a position at the head of the runway. He drew a deep breath, then let it out. It turned ghostly in the cold, bracing air. The man rocked once and then deliberately, purposefully, began to run the length of the runway. Before long he was sprinting, going full tilt. When he neared the end of the runway, the man leaped and launched himself high into the air. For a moment or two he seemed to be riding an imaginary bicycle, his arms and legs pumping furiously. Then he thrust his feet out ahead of him and came to a sliding stop in the sandpit. The man made a face, obviously less than satisfied. Picking himself up, he left the sandpit and retraced his steps to try it again. That's when Bruce decided to show himself. Leaving the obscuring shadow of the oak, he jogged out onto the track. The man turned but didn't pay him much attention. It was a university track, after all. Students ran it all the time, even at this late hour. Bruce contained himself, just as the man had, but even more so, keeping his pace to little more than a jog. All the while, however, he remained intent on the man in the sweatsuit as he completed jump after jump. After what seemed like enough time, Bruce slowed down and walked over to the runway. The man was staring at it, rubbing a muscle between his shoulder blades. He still seemed dissatisfied. Bruce checked out the footprints in the sandpit. He looked up and smiled appreciatively. "Not bad," he said. "Not bad at all." The man turned to him. He had prominent cheekbones and a sweep of long brown hair that fell almost to the bridge of his nose, and eyes like pale blue ice chips. "Not good," the man replied, with just a hint of an accent. Then he amended his statement, perhaps fearing that it sounded immodest. "Not good enough, I mean. I can do better." Bruce paced off the distance from the man's footprints to the beginning of the sandpit. "Wait a minute," he said. "This could be a world's record," the man finished for him. "Yes, I know. But there are going to be a lot of records broken in the next year or so. A lot of good people coming up. I want to be ready for them." Bruce pretended to stare at the man for a moment. "Hey, aren't you that guy? That athlete?"
He pretended to fumble for the name, though he knew it almost as well as his own.
Victor Fries,
said the man.
Bruce pointed to him. Yeah, Victor Fries. You won the Olympics last year. I saw you on television. Not the whole Olympics.
Fries chuckled good-naturedly.
As I recall, it was just a decathlon.
Bruce chuckled too.
Well, it's a pleasure to meet you.
He offered his hand, and the other man took it.
The pleasure is mine,
said Fries, polite in an old-world kind of way. His grip was strong, just what Bruce would have expected from someone who could toss a hammer as far as Fries could. Bruce considered the sandpit again. Those jumps Fries had made were pretty impressive. So, what's your secret? He asked abruptly, in the manner of someone purely curious with no agenda at all. The question took the man by surprise.
Secret?
Yeah, I figure anyone who can jump as far as you can has to have a secret. Some little, I don't know, some kind of edge.
Fries shrugged.
I have an approach, I guess. Everyone does.
He smiled.
But how do I know you're not a decathlete in the making, trying to take my title away?
Bruce laughed.
Yeah, that's me, the world-class what'd you call it?
Decathlete,
said the other man.
Bruce grunted. Yeah, decathlete.
Under the circumstances, Fries couldn't help but see how absurd the idea was. If he only knew, thought Bruce. If Fries had any inkling of how hard his young admirer had worked to make his body a perfect machine.
Well, said Fries, it's like this.
He used his hand to indicate his imaginary progress along the runway.
You run, you jump, you keep your balance as you sail through the air. All very important, but to me the key is the landing.
He turned to Bruce.
In other words, whether or not you choose to make one.
Bruce narrowed his eyes.
What do you mean?
The decathlete shrugged.
I know it's going to sound strange, but I don't land. Not when it's a really good jump. I just hang there.
But you land eventually,
Bruce pointed out.
Not really. I mean, sure, gravity brings me down after a while, but not as quickly as it has a right to.
The man's ice-chip eyes glazed over, but only for a fraction of a second.
Then I realize the jump is over, and I'm back on the ground.
Part of Bruce, the part that had audited courses with the world's foremost physicists and mathematicians, wanted to insist it was all hogwash. Forward progress on a flat plane was a function of momentum, friction, and gravity, nothing else. But another part of him, the part that had studied psychology and belief systems and arcane philosophies, argued that the mind could do things the body on its own could not, and that part of him felt the trip to this place had been worthwhile.
You just hang there,
he said.
That's it,
Fries confirmed. Bruce nodded.
I'll remember that.
And he would. He would file it away with all the other bits and pieces of wisdom he'd accumulated in his travels. And some day, he was sure, he would find a use for it. Suddenly he was aware of another presence in the vicinity of the track. He turned and saw a tall, slender, and decidedly female figure approaching from the direction of campus. Even at a distance, Bruce could see how beautiful she was. How ethereal in the moonlight, even in simple jeans and a woolen sweater. She didn't say anything. She just smiled and beckoned. But not to him, to Fries. Beside Bruce, the decathlete smiled the smile of a man in love.
Got to go,
he said.
What about all those challengers? Asked Bruce. The ones who are out to take your title?
Fries clapped Bruce on the shoulder.
Everyone's got his priorities, my friend. The decathlete is important to me, make no mistake, but not half as important as she is.
And with that, the man jogged across the field to meet his girlfriend. With all he'd read about Fries, Bruce would have known if she was the decathlete's wife. As they met, they embraced. Fries swung her off her feet. Bruce felt like an intruder. He wanted to look away, to do the polite thing, but he couldn't take his eyes off of them. They were a beautiful couple. He wanted to be part of something like that, wanted it in the worst way. but the kind of plans he had made left no room for romance, no room for permanent attachments of any kind. He would be alone, always alone. It was the path he had chosen, and he would remain faithful to it. Bruce waited until Freeze and his girlfriend had receded into the distance and disappeared among the Baroque silhouettes of the university buildings. Then he lined himself up at the start of the runway. Taking a deep breath, he hunkered down and took off. Running as fast as he could, he accelerated all the way to the end of the composite strip. Then he launched himself into space and bicycled high out over the sandpit. Just as he was about to come to Earth, he commanded himself to wait, to hang there instead, to deny gravity its due, if only for the slightest fraction of a second longer. What's more, it worked. When Bruce's feet came down in the sand, they were just a few inches shy of Freeze's best effort. Bruce didn't smile, but he came close. A few more jumps and he might have set a record himself, but no one could know that. His ambitions, his goals, were still a secret. He wanted them to stay that way. Getting up out of the sand, he brushed himself off and returned to the oak. Then he picked up the backpack he had left behind it, slung it over his shoulder, and moved on. After all, he'd heard about a contortionist in Kansas City, and one never knew when such a talent might come in handy.